Welcome to the Charm City Birdwatch podcast. I'm your host, Jake McDonnell. Before we get started, do you like Fansided? Do you visit Fansided for your sports news? Well, if you like Fansided and you're a Ravens fan, you can follow ebonybird.com for all of your Ravens updates. It is the official Fansided page for the Baltimore Ravens. And one thing we're doing there, of course, I write for that website, but one thing we're doing now is the Ebony Bird podcast, which comes out weekly, depending on, it's generally released in the middle of the week. We're recording the one this week for the recap of the Ravens Week 1 game over the Bengals and the preview of the Browns game. Recording that tonight. It will be up on Thursday, so be sure to be on the lookout for that. Check out ebonybird.com for not only the posts, but the podcast as well. Again, we're trying to get the podcast launched off the ground. Really appreciate you guys listening to this podcast and the Ebony Bird podcast as well. I'm Jake McDonnell. Again, you can find me on Twitter at jmcdonnell95. Facebook.com/CharmCityBirdwatch, and of course CharmCityBW on Twitter. We are found at CharmCityBirdwatch.com, and of course you're listening to this podcast through either iTunes or SoundCloud. Today on the podcast, I have another WBAL guest with me, a guy that I've worked with over the summer during my internship at WBAL. I've had Jerry Sandusky on the podcast. I've had Pete Gilbert on the podcast. But one person I have not had on the podcast yet is mainly involved with the 1090 WBAL radio station down in Baltimore, mainly on the radio side of things, but he also does fill in from time to time on the Channel 11 station as well. Brett Hollander, another broadcaster at WBAL 98 Rock and WBAL TV. He hosts the Brett Hollander Show from 7 to 10 on WBAL weeknights every night. Talk show host, anchor, reporter, play-by-play. He is on Twitter at Brett Hollander. And really, I didn't get to work with him that much because he was more like the way it works. The radio station is located upstairs, the TV station's downstairs. He was upstairs most of the time, but there were a couple nights, especially on the weekends, where he filled in for Jerry and Pete as it was the summertime. We had vacations and we had Ravens camp, we had Orioles games, so he would fill in. There was one night in particular when I worked with him and we had no producer there. It was just me and him producing the 11 o'clock show. And it went really well. We had a good time. It was a Saturday night, a good weekend night spent, and I really enjoyed my experience working with Brett Hollander, and I've been wanting to have him on for a while to talk some Ravens and Nose. So without further ado, here he is. Enjoy this episode of the Charm City Birdwatch podcast featuring WBL's own Brett Hollander. All right, so joining me now on the Charm City Birdwatch podcast is WBAL's Brett Hollander. Again, you can follow him on Twitter at Brett Hollander. You can listen to his the Brett Hollander Show on WBAL 1090 News Radio, weeknights 7 to 10 o'clock. So, Brett, jumping right in here, Ravens picking up a shutout 20-0 win over the Cincinnati Bengals. I don't think many Ravens fans expected a shutout dominant victory in this fashion. Defense looked outstanding, causing 5 turnovers with the 4 interceptions, and then the fumble the Terrell Suggs caused. And then, the offense, they scored 2 touchdowns within a short amount of time and did just enough, did what they had to do to hold the Bengals. What were some of your takeaways after watching the Ravens season opener in Cincinnati?
Well, it was impressive because you kind of build up to that game all off season long, and it was such an important game for the Ravens because it's a division game. It's on the road. It's against a team in a place you have not played well against, and it's one of those real swing games. You knew you were going to come home and face Cleveland with a good chance to win there. Then there's a huge kind of unknown game going to London week 3 against Jacksonville, and then you have to come back a few days later and play Pittsburgh, and then go out west to play the Raiders a few days after that. So those first 5 weeks are really tough. You have to find a way to win that kind of game. And I think it puts them in a really good position most of all. But I was impressed with how they came out and played and actually dominated most of the game. It was really impressive.
Yeah, I was particularly impressed with the offensive line. There's been so much uncertainty over the offseason. They lost John Urschel. They lost Nico Siragusa for the season with the torn ACL. They lost Rick Wagner in free agency. There were a lot of moving pieces here, and going into the first game, there really wasn't a set depth chart up until about a week or two beforehand. And they really played very well, opened up some holes. Terrence West and Buck Allen combined to run for over 150, or just at about 150 yards. Very impressive, and Flacco did take a couple of hits, but he only attempted 17 passes I kind of expecting them going forward, especially with Flacco, still having uncertainty with his back. They're going to put a heavy emphasis on the run game, but it was extremely encouraging to see them run well and commit to the run game, and I think that's going to be big for them. Maybe not later in the season, but with these first couple of weeks when Flacco's still getting back on the field after not having any training camp, really, the offensive line's performance really, really looked good on Sunday.
Yeah, I think that this team to be successful, you have to run the ball well, and I don't think there's any doubt about that. They have to be able to run the ball and kind of establish their will. I mean, they have some playmakers on the outside, but for this team to be successful, they need to control the game. They need not turn the ball over. They have to be like those 2000 Ravens defense to that extreme. But they have a really good defense. They should have really good special teams. They have a great place kicker. So they can't screw up on offense. They need to really establish alpha and try and control the game that way. I'm not sure if they have the line to do it long term, and I'm not sure if they have the backs to do it, but they'll take what they got this week. And, it wasn't flashy. It was a grinded out approach. But why throw the ball when you have a lead? Aren't there any lessons from the Super Bowl and how the games have gone in recent years? You can't just throw the ball or press it or take your pedal off the metal, as they say, just for the sake of doing it. So I thought their mindset was right, and then Joe's working his way back into it physically and kind of with his teammates. I mean, they haven't had any time together, both from the outside and from the offensive line standpoint. So why not take this opportunity and really establish yourself on the ground and run out the clock and kind of control the game that way?
One negative part about the Ravens' victory, if there was any, was the Danny Woodhead going down. Head coach John Harbaugh talked about it a little bit today, saying they're expecting him to miss about a month with that hamstring problem. I think this is a big issue for the offense because in the one drive he did play, he had 3 receptions for 33 yards, including a long of 13 yards. Flacco targeted him 3 times, and he made plays. So really tough to see him go down, and I know he's not going to miss the entire season. It looks like it appears that way, but I'm concerned about him because he was injured in training camp. He tore his ACL last year. He's in his 30s now. When he comes back, I just don't know what they're going to be able to get out of him because of what we've seen ever since he's a great weapon, and he's exactly what the Ravens need. They're going to miss him, and when he comes back, I don't know how much they're going to be able to get out of him because he's a running back in his 30s, and we know what that storyline goes in the NFL with them going over the age of 30.
It's a real concern. I mean, his track record is someone who gets hurt a lot, and you look at his size and stature, you can understand why. It would be a real benefit to this team if he was out there. I think John Harbaugh was really excited about the prospects of someone like Woodhead, someone who can make a play in the passing game and make guys miss and know what to do and how to get open. It seemed like he and Joe had really good early chemistry and rapport, and it's unfortunate that he went down so early. I think it's been probably more than 4 weeks. That's my gut. But we will see, and I think it'll be interesting to see if and when Woodhead gets back down what role he has in this offense, and do they to limit him in any way. But I would expect it to be at least a month, and probably more than likely we're thinking 6 to 8 weeks, which was a report last night from Adam Schefter on ESPN. That tends to be a typical range for a hamstring injury of this kind. They're going to need to really back off and almost start over for him to get back out there.
And moving on to this week, the Ravens will have a couple of big tests coming up in London against the Jags, the Steelers at home, and then the Raiders on the road. But this week, they take their undefeated streak of 1-0 on the line when they take on the Cleveland Browns, who actually did battle the Pittsburgh Steelers pretty well last week. Deshaun Kaiser looked impressive in what he was able to do. He was sacked 7 times. Going into this game, it's Sunday at 1. It goes, in the Ravens' favor because of their dominant defense, and they're opening up the season at home. The way their defense played last week against a team like the Bengals, the Browns are an improved version of themselves. They're going to be much better than what they were last year. I think in a couple of years, this team could actually be decent. But a tough task going into the Ravens Stadium on Sunday against a team that shut out the Bengals, and it'll be interesting to see if this shutout streak continues into a couple of quarters because the Browns do have some. Not necessarily some game changers on offense, but like Corey Coleman made plays against the Ravens last year. Isaiah Crowell made some plays against the Ravens last year. So they're going to have to stop the ability of the Cleveland Browns to get some offense going. But the way that it's shaking out to be now, this game on Sunday is generally favoring the Ravens, right?
Yeah, I would say on paper it is, just because the Ravens have a really good defense, and the Browns, who have struggled, pretty much year in, year out, they come to town, and Harbaugh and Flacco have lost 1 game against the Browns in their 9 years entering the season. So that's obviously impressive. But you never know. There's a feeling of unknown anytime you face a rookie quarterback. I think they like Kaiser in Cleveland. So I think they feel optimistic about him big picture. But, it would be a pretty big upset if Cleveland came to Baltimore and found a way to knock off the Ravens. But it's professional sports. It's the NFL. It's far from impossible. So you never know. And the Ravens need to come ready to play, obviously. And if they want to, if the game, you by no means can you take any team lightly. That goes without saying. But I think the other thing is that if you lose this game, you're in such trouble if you're the Ravens. When you look at where they're trying to go, if you're trying to get to 10 wins or play for the division title, you just cannot afford to lose to Cleveland week 2 at home when they come to town with a rookie quarterback if you expect to be in this thing all the way. So that's kind of the mentality you have to have.
We are joined by Brett Hollander of WBAL. You can catch him weeknights from 7 to 10 o'clock on WBAL 1090, and he's also on Channel 11 and 98 Rock as well. And he is Brett Hollander on Twitter. Switching over to the Orioles now, they've lost 6 straight. They're now 3 games below 500, and in the wild card chase, they are way back behind a lot of teams now. It was funny, a couple weeks ago, they were just in the thick of things, but now after losing 6 straight, they're 4.5 games back in the wild card race. Just 2 weeks left in the season now. They gave us some false hope when Tim Beckham came, and they had the hot streak, including the sweep over the Mariners, which was a crucial series at that time. But the rest of the way now, they're pretty much out of it. If they won out, yes, hypothetically they could get right back in it. But boy, tough task coming ahead with they're on the road now. They got to go to New York. They got to play Boston again. So have you officially punched in the clock, moving on to next season? Are you already, set on the Orioles season ending now?
Well, they came out with their 2018 schedule yesterday, so fans can start thinking about that now. This team would have to get some kind of hot. They have a 4-game series coming up against the Yankees. They have 3 at home against the Red Sox. Those teams are playing for something, and the Orioles have dwindled and fallen back in crunch time. But it wasn't about this current losing streak. This thing was lost in the middle of the season. When they could not get a quality start for the life of them, and it just took a lot out of them. I think this all in all is a pretty good team when you look at the bullpen, when you look at their defense, when you look at their lineup. Yeah, there are flaws in some areas, and they're still one-dimensional, but the problem here is that they have 2 starters you even have a chance to win with. Even both of those guys have ERAs in the 4s, in Bundy and Gosman. Yeah, they're a lot better than the other 3, but when you run out for 3/5 or 4/6 of your rotation, and Gosman was terrible in the first half, the guys are on the out, you don't have a chance to contend. It's amazing they've been in the race as they have in September to this point, because they don't have a competitive starting rotation, which is the most important thing in baseball if you want to contend over 6 months. So it's amazing they've even hung in there this long. It's a frustrating year from that regard, because if they were slightly better as a rotation, in other words, if they had last year's mediocre rotation, they would be in the thick of it right now. But it's just been horrendous, and it wore on them. It wore on them in every part of the game, mentally, offensively, defensively. We've seen those lapses because in a lot of long innings, people say you can't make those excuses, but that's the reality. How many games have they been down 8-0 before the game got to the 3rd inning? That takes a lot out of you. So they need to overhaul their rotation, and I think if they can do that, and there's some other big issues coming up, they should be a pretty good team again. But right now, they don't have that rotation to build around. And it's kind of a sad end of the season, but that's where they are.
And Baltimore is certainly in a football state of mind right now. One more question for you, Brett, before we let you go. Chance Sisco and Austin Hayes in particular, of 2 players that have gotten called up on the 40-man roster, but we've barely seen them in action at all. Why do you think that they're so hesitant to get them in game situations when they might be counting on Hayes to be a corner outfielder next year, and then Chance Sisco possibly being the second catcher if Wellington Castillo decides to leave?
Well, I think that they're trying to win now. You might see those guys in the final week of the season. I think that's likely the case. But as long as they're trying to win, Seth Smith has been a pretty good player this year. That's where Hayes would play. And Castillo's had a good year offensively. So is Caleb Joseph, for that matter. But I think if this team fades out, you'll have a better chance of seeing those other guys play down the stretch here and see what they have. They systematically brought up Jonathan Scope in 2013. He got a couple of at-bats at home run, and that kind of propelled him to the 2014 season where he was an everyday second baseman. We saw Mancini get called up last year, and he was actually put in some spots as the team was trying to win the wild card, and he had 3 home runs down the stretch. That clearly propelled him to having a great spring and season. So I think they'll eventually see Hayes and Sisco, assuming his team once they're officially eliminated. But until then, Buck Showalter will play this thing honestly and try and win as many games as humanly possible. And then I think a part of it is how important is getting to 500 for your team, because that's a streak at 5 now, and they can make it 6 in a row. If you live through those 14 years of losing seasons, that's not an insignificant number, in my opinion. I know fans' expectations have moved on, but I think that's still an important mark to try and sustain that sort of credibility as a franchise in the toughest division in pro sports.
He is Brett Hollander of WBAL. Again, you can listen to the Brett Hollander Show weeknights at WBAL 1090 and 98 Rock 7 to 10 during the week, and he is also occasionally on WBAL TV Channel 11, and of course his Twitter handle is Brett Hollander. Thank you again, Brett. I hope you're doing well, and best of luck this Sunday as the Ravens have their home opener against Cleveland. It will certainly be an interesting thing to see if they can continue this shutout momentum into this Sunday.
Yeah, it should be fun, and looking forward to getting back to M&T Bank Stadium. I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.